Everyone, it's Reese here, and today I'm talking about literature reviews. So, what is a literature review? How do you sort of prepare yourself to write one? And sort of what is the best way to organise it? We're going to talk about all of this in today's video. So, the key question to begin with immediately is what is a literature review? So, this is something that's talked about and something you've probably come across. What actually is it? Well, broadly speaking, it's meant to demonstrate that you've have knowledge and you understand whatever field it is that you're reviewing. But it's not just the case that you're able to list, books and articles and whatever. You're able to sort of understand them, so you can demonstrate that you understand what the arguments are, and that you can sort of critically analyse them. What are they doing? What are they not doing? So what you're doing is sort of covering stuff that's there and analysing it, saying why it's good, why it's bad, and what the limitations, and evaluating and kind of finding the gaps in scholarship that already exists, and finding any sort of controversies, disagreements, other places where sources aren't talking to each other. So it's a demonstration, A, that you actually know the field. You're writing a piece on, let's pick something, Romeo and Juliet, to show that you sort of know some of the key pieces of scholarship and help sort of that have influenced work on Romeo and Juliet, that you're able to analyse it and say, this particular book does this thing really well, but this is something it doesn't do very well. And you're able to sort of identify those gaps and areas where the sources may or may not talk to each other. So that is the key thing. So those are things you're demonstrating, that you know the field, that you understand the main arguments, and that you can identify some key gaps. So step number one really is knowing the field, knowing what are the key works that are relevant to whatever it is you're discussing. And how do you do this? Well, if you're writing a piece, you probably sort of have a sense of the field already. If you're at a sort of an undergraduate or postgraduate level, there may be reading lists that can sort of influence. It may be the case you have lecture materials on that's relevant. And there are ways to sort of find secondary sources to sort of talk to a topic. I will leave a link to my video down below. But so being able to identify those key works, but also to identify which ones are the most relevant, right? So if your piece is on, let's go back to the Romeo and Juliet example. If your piece is on gender, say, there may be work specifically on gender in the play, which would be more relevant than the thing on its, say, discussion of capital, whatever. So sort of it's not just listing every single thing that exists, but it's trying to find everything that is particularly relevant to your piece, or sort of key things that are particularly relevant. There is support for this. Talk to lecturers, talk to especially librarians, subject librarians, or people in your sort of academic library. They are brilliant and they know all the places to look. So it's the thing of sort of essentially reading a lot, knowing the field, being able to identify what are the key works. And what I would say to you is in sort of most bigger fields, that work probably exists already. You'll sort of probably have a sense of what are the key things to look at. But yes, no, looking around, and so I think it's very, very handy to have sort of almost kind of a matrix. And this is what I did when I did a review, is that I had the work and the author, the main arguments, my sort of thoughts on those arguments, and then sort of any potential gaps. And if you can have that potentially as a structure, or at least that in your head, that is very, very helpful. After you've got all the sources that you want to discuss, then comes the question of organisation, right? So how do you organise these? How do you organise your review? There are multiple ways to do it, and there's not a sort of a single correct answer. And I want to talk about three ways that I think are sort of likely to be the most common ways. But again, there's no sort of correct answer. It's whatever's right for the piece of work. One way is almost sort of a chronology, so sort of going from sort of the earliest sources that are relevant up to sort of whatever is your most modern day. There's a logic to that because generally works build on each other. So it might be the case that essentially you're tracking a change in a topic, or you're tracking sort of an evolution in scholarly argument over time, in which case sort of that sort of linear chronological approach makes sense. Another way to think about it is theme. Which, I mean, there may be certain pieces of scholarship that focus on one particular thing, in which case it makes sense to sort of cluster them together, and to sort of identify sort of key themes that are emerging out of the field. These things can be combined as well. You might go through time and find, in this particular era, this was the key thing people were talking about, and then in this era they were talking about this, whatever. And lastly, the sense of sort of almost sort of creating an opposition. So sort of one piece of literature that's important says this, but another one disagrees with it, and sort of having that sort of kind of sort of positioning the conflicting arguments against each other. This is again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Those are likely to be the most common. The sort of the key thing really is sort of what I'm going to talk about in the next point, which is however you organise it, you're essentially building up to what is the thing, what is the gap that your own work is addressing. So yeah, here we go. So this is the ultimate endpoint of the literature review. Assuming it's not a review in its own right, as part of a journal article or whatever, the idea generally is that you're reviewing the literature with a view to identifying a gap, or to in some sense create a logic for the work that you are going to do. The review should in some way lead into your work. So this is really where to ask the question of sort of what are you interested in each piece of literature that you've looked at? How does it in some sense, and you don't have to write this for sort of every single source, but have this question in your mind, is sort of in what sense does it contribute to the work that you are planning to undertake? And there may be different ways for this, the actual sort of content, the main conclusions that they draw, maybe things you agree with or disagree with, things you want to build on or things you want to dispute. It may be sort of how they've gone about the research. It may be they've used a particular approach, a particular form of close reading, a particular form of, I don't know, data gathering, that you think is going to be really, really useful to your work. Or, again, you think that you might do something different to test and see if their conclusions are still valid. It might be the scale of the work. It might be the case that they've analysed a particular play, to go back to the Romeo and Juliet example, and you're saying, well, this is good here, but it's not been done here. In every circumstance, think about sort of the literature you've chosen. It should, in some sense, contribute to whatever it is that you are going to do. And that is often the case of you're building on stuff, or you are identifying gaps. You're seeing stuff that's not there and saying, well, I'm going to sort of fill in that gap. And this is really sort of the fundamental crux of an academic literature review, is that you're kind of reviewing work with a view to demonstrating, normally, something that is not there, in order that you can then do that work yourself, and showing that you have an understanding sufficient of what has come before, so you know that this sort of gap is there and needs to be filled. The last thing I want to talk about is what I've called here live reviews. So this is the sense that no research is sort of operating in a vacuum, and it may be the case that new things appear. I know when I was doing my PhD that sort of books appeared as I was writing, so the sort of literature review always had to be revised to sort of include new stuff that was relevant. So having in your head that the survey is never complete. There will always be new things that appear, not least of which is your own work at the end of the day. What I would say though, as well as live, is have a sense of sort of the research culture. So whatever field you're in, are there conferences that are sort of engaging with this work? Is there, I don't know, a particular film or TV show that has sort of put your topic, sort of made it significant again? And think about sort of that wider context as well, because that can often be a justification for doing work. Let me pick an example. The film about Napoleon that came out last year, as of when I'm recording this, that sort of invited questions about sort of the history of the French Revolution, Napoleon, etc. So that is sort of itself a justification for sort of interrogating some questions. So again, having a sense of sort of the wider culture, the wider sort of research culture, but also culture more generally, can be great in sort of justifying why work needs to be done and sort of identifying things that have emerged, but also marring research, combining it with essentially the wider sphere. So I think that's really, really useful. Sort of a literature review is good in that you review literature, but it's also, I think, the better ones, I think stronger ones also tend to have a sense of sort of that wider culture around your topic or your question. So there you go, some thoughts and some advice on how to put together a literature review. And hopefully this has been useful. If you have any extra comments, please do comment them down below, and it'd be very helpful for everyone. And of course, anything else, any other videos you'd like me to make, again, please comment below. I'm keen to make the sort of stuff that you guys want to watch. Otherwise, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, ring the bell so you know when there's a new video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.